Hello, everyone. Bringing you some content today for Starter Deck Analysis Part 2 with the Sapphire Steel Starter Deck. So, as with before, we're going to kind of pick apart the Sapphire Steel deck, look at the cards in it, anything that's good or bad. We'll talk about how the cards get used, general strategies running this deck, and then we will talk about some specific matchups against the other starter decks. So Amber Amethyst and Ruby Emerald. Without further ado, let's get into it. So this 60 card Sapphire Steel deck has going through the one ink cards all the way down to the highest ink card Maui, which is 8 ink, I think. So on the one ink cost cards, we have two Develop Your Brains. These are fairly standard for Sapphire, and kind of good. You always like they're always playable. So whether or not it's you ink it early game or you play it turn one to kind of look, or you search, you try playing it to search out for your answers or your lore generators later on in the game. So develop your brain, fine place to be in. Magic Golden Flowers are not useful at all. These are actually the first cards to ink. If you ever have any cards to ink, they can also be replaced. But I think as we kind of look, there may be some other cards that we can also replace. These are inkable, so it means that they're not a super high priority to replace with cards from your starter pack, booster pack in your starter deck. So, but you would almost never run a Magic Golden Flower unless something happens. And then please put in the comments how Magic Golden Flower has won you the game. Will definitely be really interesting to read, and maybe you'll show some insight for us. Then we have the typical one drop. So I will actually group the Flounders and the Goons together. So these are the one drop 2/2 to attack, to defense, one lore generators, and they don't do anything else. Great to play down to either answer an opponent's play, or if you're on the play, to kind of start pressuring their board and start generating lore. And then Captain Hooks are great challengers. So at one drop, 1/3, when it's unexerted, you kind of just treat it as a 3/2. Sorry, a 1/2 normally. Unexerted, you treat it as a 3/2 because it can deal 3 damage, which is the highest damage that can be done by a 1 ink character. So really great if your opponent has anything really at the 1 or 2 on turn 1 or 2. It can even run into things like Minnie Mouse. It can run into things like Donald Duck, the 2 ink characters. Once you play this card, it really makes your opponent think a bit before questing. Then finally, we have 3 copies of Fire the Cannons. Great removal. Removal's always good. I'll talk a little bit later about how to use the removal in Steel Sapphire, because sometimes it can mean the difference between winning or losing. But all that to say is you almost never want to replace Fire the Cannons. They're pretty good, solid in this deck. And then, and I misgrouped this Develop the Brain. So there's actually 3 copies of Develop the Brain in the Steel Sapphire deck. Cool. So those are the typical 1 ink cards. For 2 ink, we have Prince Eric, 2 copies of Prince Eric. And this card is a similar to Captain Herc, except with 1 more health for 1 more ink. It is also a great answer to like just defender to prevent your opponent from questing. So if you don't have anything turn 1, or if you have some like really high cards and you just want to delay the game, drop a couple of these Erics down, and it really makes it difficult for your opponent to quest. Then we have 3 copies of Aurora Regal Princess, which is 2 ink, 2/2, which is very bad stat lines for the 2 ink, but it does quest for 2 lore. So you would play this card if your opponent doesn't have anything or seems to be planning a pretty slow strategy, and you can quest safely with her once or twice. She'll generate a lot of value. We also have the frying pan. 2 ink item that is you can banish this item after you play it and select a character your opponent controls, and it can't challenge you, any of your characters. So this is also one of those very niche items that most of the time you're just going to be inking, unless like it's really late game and your opponent has like a threat that is clearly going to challenge into one of the characters that's generating you a lot of lore, and you want to just prevent that from happening. But like 8 times out of 10, you're probably going to be inking this card. So one jump ahead. So the name of the game for Sapphire is Ramp. So you almost always want to keep any of your ramp cards. So especially in the mulligan, like when you mulligan, sometimes it's okay to mulligan away your 1 ink or 2 ink cards in order to search for some of your ramp. And I would say of the 3 ramp cards, one jump ahead, Grammatala and Mickey Mouse, just keep those in your hand. I mean, like at least keep 2 of them. If you like start out with a hand with like 2 1 jumps and 2 Mickey Mouses, then sure you can mulligan away like 1 of each or something like that. But at least keep 2 of Mickey Mouses or 1 jump ahead, and any of your Grandma Talas really. So, all right, on to Ransack. Ransack is a 2 ink action that essentially is lets you draw 2 and discard 2 cards. So it lets you filter through your deck. You're net losing 1 card because you're also playing this Ransack card. But I would say early game this card is really bad because it just gives you puts you at a disadvantage in terms of how many cards you have versus how many cards your opponent has. Late game, if you're looking for a specific answer or a specific way to win or a specific card, might as well give this a shot. Also, like a card that's likely to be inked many times. So, Coconut Basket, bad card. Healing. I just have a thing against healing, right? So these 3 copies of Coconut Basket, I would put into along the same lines of the Magic Golden Flower. Just ink them when you can, and put in the comments if they ever led you to win a game. And then Grammatala is we talked about how she was part of the ramp suite. She is a 2 ink that's really bad stats, 1/1. But her ability is that if she ever is banished in any way, either opponent's removal or challenge or that sort of stuff, she can go into your inkwell. And so this makes it really good because essentially it's just like a delayed 1 jump ahead attached to a body. A lot of times you can quest with her and your opponents don't really want to run into her. Because it just kind of helps you ramp. So sometimes the only way to get her into your inkwell is just by running her into another stronger character that your opponent has questing or exerted or something like that. And a lot of times it actually turns out to be pretty good because you also have some removal tools like fire the cannons. So for example, if you run Grammatala into a character with 3 health, all of a sudden now they're in the range of fire the cannons or grab your swords or something like that. So there's definitely something to be said about that value off of that 1 attack. Onto the 3 ink characters, we have 2 copies of Kristoff. So this is the 3/3, 3 attack, 3 defense card that generates 2 ink, and it's Sapphire still has a lot of ways to generate more than 1 ink, and this is the beginning of kind of cards that are really nice to play, depending on the situation, right? So if you are ahead on the board state, which means that you're pretty, you have or I wouldn't say a lot of characters, but you have characters on the board, and the trades seem pretty favorable to you, and your opponent is likely unable to attack well into your board, then you want to play out all of these lore generators and try to race to the 20 lore. And Kristoff is a great way to do that. At 3 ink. However, sometimes if you still need to ramp, which you definitely need to do in this deck, you have 3 copies of Mickey Mouse. It's the 3 ink. It's uninkable, so that's something to be aware of. But it's 3 ink, and it's a 1/3 body that when you played, you get to put the top card of your deck into your Inkwell Exerted. So it's another way to really ramp up how much ink you have. Note here, most of these cards go that ramp go stipulate that they go into your Inkwell Exerted, which really means that you don't get the benefit and value out of that ink during the current turn, which in general just means that you want to play out all of your ramp as early as possible to be able to utilize the ink that they're generating as soon as possible. Then we have 2 copies of Smash. The 3 ink deal 3 damage to a chosen character. Great for removal once again, but once again, it's really important to know your matchups and figure out what you want to play these removal cards on. And then we have 2 copies of Jasmine, which is, let's see, the 3. Sapphire counterpart to Steel's Kristoff. It has the exact same stats, but it is a princess. So the difference is that it has the princess keyword, but it's a 3 ink 3/3 that quests for 2. And then finally, if you need to protect your board, or your board's looking pretty flimsy or something like that, and you want some way to make it difficult for your opponent to challenge exerted cards on your board, we have Hercules, which is a great 3 cost 3/3 body, the same as the Kristoff and the Jasmine, but it only quests for 1 lore. However, it does have the bodyguard keyword, which means that when an opponent chooses to challenge your characters, they have to challenge into your bodyguard characters first, if any exist, and destroy them or banish them in order to then challenge the rest of your characters. So they provide really good protection for your other lore generators, since you typically want those to be alive, even if Hercules ends up taking the hit. Cool. At the 4 cost level, we have 3 copies of Maleficent, which is slightly... so essentially it's Kristoff and Jasmine with 1 additional health. But that 1 additional health actually matters so much that it does justify it being in the 4 cost position. So 4 cost 3/4 that quests for 2. And sometimes don't be afraid to actually use these in challenges. A lot of times you want to quest for lore with them. But if you get a favorable trade, for example, if an opponent runs a Kristoff or a Jasmine, and you can trade with them, removing 2 of the lore generators, or like 1 lore generator that generates 2 lore, and also keep your Maleficent alive on the board, that's great value. So that 1 extra health really does make a difference. Finally, we have the Aurora Briar Rose, which is a 4 cost 2/5, which has the ability that when she comes into the play, she can give an opposing character -2 attack. So essentially, I don't know if you watched my earlier video on the Amber Amethyst, but it's essentially like a Maximus, except a little bit weaker. Because she costs a bit more. But essentially, the idea here is if you play it down on an opponent's creature or character that can do 3 damage, has a 3/3 stat, you can give it -2 attack. So now it's only 1/3, and so now when you run your Maleficent into it, it only takes 1 damage instead of 3 damages. Having said that, I think of all the 4 ink or 4 cost cards, the Aurora Briar Rose is the weakest and is the most likely to be um, put in the inkwell. So if you're making a tough choice between this and some other card like Maleficent, definitely go for putting the Aurora into the inkwell, specifically because she also only generates 1 lore, while Maleficent generates 2. Cool. Now we are on to the 6 cost or 5 cost characters. So we have, take a drink of water here. We have 5 different cards that have 5 costs associated with it. We have Maleficent, Invited, which is a 3/6 that generates 3 lore. This is also a great card. Really helps Steel Sapphire get to that 20 lore for the victory. So yeah, pretty much everything past like 2 ink or 3 ink are cards that you want to run and you want to keep. So then Simba, Rightful Heir, a 3/5 that quests for 2. But he also has the ability whenever he challenges and banishes a character, he generates 1 lore. So essentially, you can either generate 2 lore with him without dealing with an opponent's character, or you can attack an opponent's character, and in most cases, because you're attacking an opponent's character, you don't generate any lore, but Simba mitigates that kind of cost opportunity by still generating you 1 lore. I have 2 copies of Beast. So Beast is a 5 cost 4/4 with the ability that allows you to banish an item your opponent controls. Generally, your opponent's not going to play many items or any items. And even if they do, those items aren't going to be that impactful. That most of the time you just read this as a 5 cost 4/4, 4 attack, 4 defense character that can generate 2 lore. And even that is pretty solid here in Lorcana. So that's why it's pretty good. Grab Your Sword is a great card. It just gives the Steel Sapphire deck so much flexibility, but it also really is important, along with the smashes and the fire cannons, to know when to hold on to it and when to use it. And I'll talk a little bit about that after I go through the rest of this deck. And then at the end, we have 5 cost Aurora, which you can shift her on to an Aurora Regal Princess. So, for example, turn 2 you can play an Aurora Regal Princess, and turn 3 you can immediately shift Aurora Dreaming Guardian onto her. In general, that shift play isn't necessarily like immediately gonna win you the game or anything. It's definitely an option. For example, if an opponent has like a Captain Hook on the board and you have an Aurora and it's your turn, you can shift it onto a Dreaming Guardian and actually quest for 2 lore, knowing that the character is relatively safe. However, it's just as fine just playing this out on turn 5 and give your characters ward. So Aurora's other ability, Dreaming Guardian's other ability, is it gives all of your other characters ward, which means they can be targeted by cards. Now, this isn't as relevant against the Amber Amethyst matchup, but against the other matchups, a mirror match in Steel Sapphire or against Ruby Emerald, they have a lot of targeted removal or targeted effects. And so giving ward to them can really be beneficial there. Cool. And then at the 6 ink level, we have some more great cards. So we have Mufasa, which is 4/6 that quests for 3. And then we have nothing too much to say about this other than it helps you end games. And then Scar, which is a 5/4 quest for 2. But when you play this character, something your opponent has gets -5 attack. So essentially what that means is if you really want to play this card when you have some other good cards that can defeat an opponent's character. And so you can play this card out and allow you to even make some better trades. So now your characters likely won't be losing or taking any damage at all. At the 7 cost level, we have Simba Return King, which is I mean, you definitely want to aim for these high cost cards. If you end up like in terms of like mulliganing, I think it's okay to like mulligan Simba or Maui, especially if you are really looking for some early game plays. But if you have them in hand, never think just don't think about inking them because they are just really good when you can get them out. And while it might seem like it'll take you a long time to reach the 7 or the 8 ink, it goes by a lot faster than you think, especially with all of your ramp. Like your Grammatalas, your One Jump Aheads, your Mickey Mouses, you'll be able to get to 8 ink in a blink of an eye. So Simba, great card to put down. It kind of controls the board, is a huge threat because it can attack for 8 damage. It also has quite a bit of health, 6 health. It also has the ability to attack into opponents' evasive characters. For example, their Pascals or Flotsams in, or is it Jetsam? I think it's Jetsam in Amber Amethyst. And the Pongos and the Tinkerbells in Ruby Emerald. So this card can, don't forget that if you have a Simba on the board, you can use that to challenge into those evasive characters. And finally, Maui. And pretty generic 8/8. For 8, the quest for 3 lore. And again, is just a game ender or just a card you want to race with. Cool. So, without further ado, let's take a look at some generic gameplay ideas or like mulligans and stuff. Let me grab a little bit of water again, and I will. So let's start with what cards are you really hoping to keep, and what cards are you really mulliganing? I would say early game, it's a toss up between if you want to keep or mulligan the Simba or the Maui. I don't think it really matters too much. Like maybe 7 or 8 times out of 10, I'll probably mulliganing these high end cards. But it's also nice to have one. You probably don't want to have too many of these high end cards. So if you have like a Maui, a Mufasa, a Scar, you probably want to get rid of at least 2. Just keep one high end card in your hand, just as a target to reach for. And then you never want to mulligan your grab your swords. It's a one of, and it just is always good. So always keep grab your swords in your hand. Everything else on the 5 ink level, I'm often have no hesitation mulliganing. So if you see any of these 5 cost cards in your opening hand, feel free to toss them back into your deck. Same with the forecasts. Really, like you'll be drawing into them pretty regularly, so no need to hold on to the 5 costs or the 4 costs. For the 3 costs, I would say mulligan. Don't mulligan any Mickeys unless you have 2 or more, and then it's okay to mulligan away 1 Mickey. Generally, my rule of thumb is as a ramp player, you should really be looking for 2 ramp sources in your opening hand or at the beginning of the game. So whether that's One Jump Ahead and Mickey, One Jump Ahead and Tala, or Tala and Mickey, try to find at least 2 of those ramp cards in your and if not, try to mulligan some of your like 6 drops or 5 drops in order to have another chance at getting to those ramp cards. So yeah, try to get at least 2 of the ramp cards in your opening hand. Smashes, take or leave it. I think most of the time, because like I don't have the ramp that I need, I end up mulliganing the smashes just to get another card draw to see if I could get that ramp. But it's also perfectly okay to keep it to help answer some of the opponent's threats. So, for example, Smash is really good on any evasive character, especially Pongo that Ruby Emerald plays. So, just as a note, Smash is good. Then Jasmine, I most of the time I mulligan away the Jasmines and the Hercules. On the 2-drop level, typically I mulligan away all of these coconut baskets since they're really not good, as well as the ransacks and the frying pans. Um, I'll keep any Grandma Talas I have, even if it like brings me up to more than 3 uh, uh, ramp cards, just because Grandma Tala is pretty versatile and it's a pretty good card. Yeah. And then same thing with one jump ahead. I would try to at least get 2 of the one jump aheads or Mickey's or Grandma Talas in your opening hand. Um, Auroras, most of the time I tend to favor Prince Eric over Auroras because 2 health at the 2 cost stat line is just a little bit too low. I really am looking for that 3 health in a 2 cost character here, and Prince Eric can deal 3 damage as well. So overall, a whole 1 attack, 1 defense better than Aurora generally. So between if you are making a choice between Prince Eric or Aurora, most of the time I choose Prince Eric to keep in my hand and mulligan away the Aurora. For the 1-drops, now it's where we get a little bit tricky. Sometimes you have to consider if you're going first or if you're drawing first. So if you're playing first, I would say depending on the rest of your hand, if it's like a hand that you know you're gonna want to get to late game or end game, it's okay to mulligan away your 1-drop characters like Flounder, Captain Hook, or Goons. But if you have like kind of a nice curve like in your hand, like 1-drops, 2-drops, and 3-drops galore, most you should probably think about just holding on to your 1-drops. I think most of the time I just like to have 1-drop in my hand at the beginning of the game, just not necessarily to play down as a character, but just as an answer potentially. Even if I'm on like the play first, right? So for example, if I had a hand where I had a Captain Hook in my hand and some smattering of 2-drops, 3-drops, and so forth, a lot of times I'll ink something that I don't need, like a Briar Rose, and just keep Captain Hook in my hand and pass the turn. Because if an opponent plays out something that requires you to have Captain Hook as an answer, then awesome. Like next turn, you just play out the Captain Hook. But if an opponent doesn't play anything that you're super concerned with, you can always ink Captain Hook in order to like get another ink in your inkwell. So I'd say the same thing with all 5 of these characters at 1 cost. If you're holding a card like for reactive purposes, I would say Captain Hook is going to always be better just because of his higher attack with 3 attack. But it's pretty equivalent. Always mulligan away the magical and flowers. And I would say in terms of fire the cannons, probably keep 1 in your starting hand, and if you get like 2 or 3, feel free to mulligan away the other to try to look for ramp. Pretty similar with Develop the Brain. Typically, I like to have just 1 in my hand as a turn 1 play, and then they're pretty much just goes straight into the inkwell if you ever draw into them. So, all right. With that breakdown, let's oh, and then general like gameplay strategies, right? Like so pretty much what you're really aiming for with this deck is to on turn 2 play a 2-cost character, either a Prince Eric, Aurora, or preferably a Grammatala. And then on turn 3 you can just 1 jump ahead. With your 2-cost character, and then play out a Mickey. So that immediately ramps you from 2 ink to 4 ink, right? So turn 1, do something. Turn 2, play out Grammatala. Turn 3, play out an ink to reach 3 ink, sing one jump ahead to reach 4 ink with Grammatala, and then play out the Mickey with the 3 ink to immediately reach 5 ink, actually. So essentially, all of a sudden now, once you get to 5 ink, a lot of these other possibilities open up to you. So that's really the play, the thing that like you're really happy to be able to do with Steel Sapphire. Yeah, other than that, fire the cannons and smash and grab your swords. There's not too many damaging cards in Steel Sapphire, so you definitely need to ration and play them well, use them well. So a lot of times, fire the cannons really depends on the matchup. Against Amber Amethyst, you have Pongos as great evasive targets for fire the cannons, and Jetsams as great evasive targets for the smashes. Otherwise, I think fire the cannons and smash should ideally be used to trade or like deal with threats that you normally can't deal with, especially if they generate more than one lore. And we can take a look in the decks a little bit later there. Smash against so against Ruby Emerald, fighter cannons operate amazing on their Peter Pans. So Peter Pan has 2 health, so one fighter cannons would kill it. And Smash is great to be used under Pongos. However, once again, all these decks have like a lot more than necessarily just evasive cards to deal with. So sometimes your opponent's evasive cards might not even be the most threatening. So I would say in general, for all of your removals, keep them close to your chest until like you run up against a threat that either over the long run is gonna win your opponent the game because it's just going to generate a lot of lore and it's tricky to deal with, or something that's big and scary that you need to deal with immediately. Use your removal for those. And part of like recognizing what cards are threats and what aren't just comes from getting used to gameplay and running this deck a bit there. So that's pretty much it about removal. The one thing, in addition, is Grab Your Swords is such a swingy card, right? No pun intended. So it can do 2 damage to your entire opponent's board, and sometimes, like let's say opponent just has 1 or 2 characters that happen to have 2 health, right? It really depends on like kind of situations there, but sometimes you really want to grab your swords and wait until opponents play out even more characters. It really depends. Sometimes it might be too greedy, like you might wait too long and then like your opponent's already run away with the game. But sometimes if you wait just long enough, you can play out an optimal grab your swords turn to really shift the game in your favor there. So that's all there really is to say about grab your swords here. And then typically you're always trying to ink and ramp each turn and get up to like at least your 5 cost or 6 cost cards. And then later on, you'll realize with this deck that you start running into issues with card draw because you don't have any card draw. So you're going to be top decking a lot. That just means that sometimes you need to slow down with putting a card into your inkwell from hand, and instead rely on Mickeys and one jump aheads and Grammatalas to fill your inkwell rather than playing a card from your hand into the inkwell. Because remember, that card that you played into your inkwell can also be played as a character or an action on the board, right? So you have to just be aware that once you start getting more ink or starting to get low on cards, sometimes it's more beneficial to not ink a card every single turn on your turn. And once you get to 8 ink, you're pretty much good to not really have to ink too much the rest of the game, unless you really need to like play 2 cards on the same turn or something like that. So yeah, let's take a look at, let's move some of these things down here. Let's see if we can just, it's going to be a little bit messy, but we'll deal with it. Cool. Okay, this gives us a space. Let's take a look at the Ruby Emerald matchup. Let's open up the deck and take a quick look at some of their cards that are more threatening here. So we have Pongos, the epitome of Ruby Emerald. They have like so many copies of them. Peter Pans, Aladdin. Let's see if I can find a Mad Hatter. Here it is. That's about it. They have like some of these high cost cards and stuff. Here we go. Cool. So I would say most of Red's strategy, and I might as well bring out our removal here. So most of Red's strategy revolves around kind of Pongos, Peter Pans, Mad Hatters, Aladdins, and just in general, they have pretty good utility here. So one thing to note is Mad Hatter is a 2/4 that quests for 3, which is if you talk about threatening cards, this is a threat. And if you attack into it with anything like it gives your opponent a card draw. So if you need 2 characters in order to banish this card, your opponent can draw 2 cards. So ideally, how you would deal with it is if your opponent plays out a Mad Hatter, if you have any character that can attack for 4 damage, which include your, let's see, what does that include? Your Beast, and I think any of your 6 or higher cost. So at the 5 cost level, it's going to be a Beast. At the 6 cost or higher level, any of your cards can deal with the Mad Hatter in one shot. And that's a fairly good trade. It just nets your opponent 1 card draw. So you do that every single day. Otherwise, in order to deal with it, 2 fire the cannons is needed, or some combination of smash, fire the cannons, and grab your swords. And so really, the advantage of using your removal to get rid of Mad Hatter is that it doesn't allow your opponent to draw any cards. So that's always an option as well. So for your opponent's evasives, I think it's pretty clear. You always want to play the cannons on the Peter Pan and the smashes on the Pongo. Peter Pan is a much less threat as an evasive character just because it only quests for 1. So you often have a lot more time to deal with him. So for example, if your opponent plays a turn 3 Peter Pan and you just have a smashing hand, most of the time I will just wait and see if an opponent plays down a Pongo before choosing what to do with my smashes, right? Because if you use a smash on Peter Pan and your opponent gets a Pongo and you end up drawing a fire to cannons, it just feels bad. So try to use your smashes on the Pongo there. As for Ruby Emerald, just always be aware that if they have a Aladdin on the board, they have 2 Aladdins. The Aladdin with Ward, if I can find him, and the Aladdin that removes 1 of your lures here. So these are the 2 Aladdins that your opponent can play either on turn 2 or turn 3. And they, on turn 5, they can shift the Aladdin onto one of these and challenge one of your characters for a lore swing there. I mean, generally, if Aladdin is out on the board, he has to be dealt with. So using any combination of removal or challenges to deal with the Aladdin is imperative. And then same with the Stitch at 6 cost. And the only other thing to note in this matchup is just be a little bit aware that your opponent can always have Dragonfire. I find it's so hard to play around. Sometimes you just have to just like hope that they don't have it. But for example, if you like have like in your hand Mufasa's and what is it? Maui's, and those sort of cards, it might be best to either, if you can, play out an Aurora first, just to give your characters ward so that Dragonfire can't target them, or maybe play out like one of your relatively weaker characters, like for example, if you have Mufasa, Simba, and Maui, then maybe try playing the Mufasa first, see if it sticks on the board. If it doesn't, your opponent Dragonfires it. Cool. Now you have one less Dragonfire to worry about. Your opponent does have 3 Dragonfires, just as an FYI. Then likely they won't have another Dragonfire for your Simba or your Maui. So yeah, that's about it. A lot of times, like, you just need to hope, because when you're playing out like Mufasa or Simba, you really want to use it to control your opponent's board. And when Ruby Emerald gets great draws, they just keep on removing your characters that can deal with their board and questing with their board. And sometimes, yeah, games just go like that. The other card of note is this 3 cost Mother Knows Best card. It also just allows red to just temporarily remove one of your strong attackers or lore generators, returns it back to your hand, and gives them a turn to quest safely. So ideally, what you should be trying to do is make sure you have 2 or more strong characters in play at one time, just so that while Mother Knows Best can return 1, it can't return both of those characters that can challenge into your opponent's questing characters. So that's pretty much it for the Ruby Emerald matchup. Let's take a look now at the Amber Amethyst matchup. So once again, Amber Amethyst has 2 evasives, Jetsam and Pascal. Pascal, for the most part, is an evasive. Though, when you're playing an opponent who plays out a Pascal, and then let's say plays out turn 2 a something that's a 2/3 Minnie Mouse. I just went right past it, I think, here. So if an opponent plays turn 1 Pascal and you answer with a turn 1 Huck, and your opponent plays turn 2 Minnie, and your turn, and like let's say you play like a ramp or something like that, turn 2 Tala or something, there is a slight chance that on turn 3, when this is a board state, your opponent might quest with both of these characters, because in their mind they're thinking, hey, like both of well, I guess in this case it wouldn't work because Grandma Tala, Captain Herc has 3 attacks, so I'll be able to take out the mini. But let's say you had, instead of Captain Herc, Goons or something like that. You'd be surprised at the number of situations that come up where an opponent quests with everything on board, or even just quests with the Pascal. And maybe if this was a mini, what you can always do is just smash, kill off the mini, and then remember, Pascal doesn't have evasive anymore if there's no other characters on the board. So just attack into the Pascal. That way, normally it would cost you a fire to cannons to kill the Pascal. But this way it's just a 1/1 for one that quests for one, and it feels really good just to take out the Pascal. So always be on the lookout for those plays where you can either fire the cannons or smash an opponent's unexerted character because they think it's protecting the Pascal, and then kill off that Pascal. So that's a important kind of tech against Amber Amethyst. The other kind of thing to watch out for is Amber Amethyst has Rafiki, which essentially means that if you're playing the Captain Hooks or the Prince Erics, most of the time you don't want to quest with them because when they're questing, their attack drops to 1 rather than the 3 normally. So a lot of times, even against an empty board of your opponents, and you think that it's totally okay to quest and your characters will be safe, opponent can play down a Rafiki and just take out Captain Herc or Prince Eric and only take 1 damage. So just be aware. Sometimes you do want that lore from the quest, but be aware that opponent does have characters that can immediately come on the board and attack or challenge one of your characters. And then the other thing really that I think is important to note, or there's 2 more things that are important to note in the matchup. One is the Mickey Mouse and Broom combo. So if I can find the magic brooms, perfect. If I can pull it, there we go. So a lot of times, what if an opponent has both of these cards, which is their combo pieces, right? Magic Brooms, essentially, when Mickey is on the board, his ability is whenever the Magic Brooms gets into a challenge, either it challenges you or you challenge it, and it gets banished, it goes back right to their hand. So essentially, it's really a bad idea to challenge into a Magic Broom or let that Magic Broom attack into your characters if a Mickey Mouse is on board. So one thing that often happens is Amber Amethyst players will play out the Magic Broom on turn 2. And then on turn 3, let's say like you just have a Grandma Tala, right? Normally, like you'd expect, like it's a free quest, and they'd quest with the Magic Brooms and everything. But sometimes, like if they're afraid that like something might banish the Magic Brooms, oftentimes they won't quest with the Magic Brooms on turn 3. And if they don't do that, either you have something on your board that can trade well into Magic Brooms, or they have a Mickey hand. So yeah, let's say a better example actually isn't if you have Grandma Tala, but let's say you had a Goons on board or something like that. So clearly, if they now quest with the Magic Brooms, you can trade your Goons into the Brooms, and it'll go away before they get a chance to have the Mickey out on the board. So a lot of times what they end up doing is just not questing with the Brooms on turn 3, and then on turn 4 playing out the Mickey Mouse. So just something to be aware of. So for example, let's say like you're in that situation where your opponent plays out the broom and doesn't do anything with it on turn 3, and you have the option of questing or not with your goons. Sometimes it might be a good idea to not quest with your goons, right? Because if you don't quest and your opponent plays out a Mickey, what they'll end up probably doing is just having to quest with the brooms for lore, because the brooms is pretty safe from challenges now. But if you did quest with your goons, then they play down Mickey, and now they attack into the goons. It banishes your goons, and they get their brooms back into your hand, and they can play it next turn and rinse and repeat that process. So just be aware that's a pretty common combo. It's fairly rare in the starter decks because Mickey is only a one of, but if it doesn't pay to be prepared or be ready for those situations there, right? And then finally, just another bomb to be aware of is Dr. Facilier in the Amber Amethyst matchup. A lot of times, Amber Amethyst is going to try to either shift on turn 5 onto the Facilier, or on turn 8, 7, 7 on turn 7 play out the Facilier, and now their entire board has the effect that I just described with Mickey and Brooms, right? If they challenge into anything with Mickey, or you kill off their Mickey or Rafiki or something like that, it just bounces them right back to their hand and they can continue to play. And at that point, they just have a lot of ink, right? So a lot of times when the Facilier comes down, if it comes down, you just hope it doesn't. When it comes down, it becomes a racing game. So ideally, you should always try to have build up your board so that when your opponent just feels pressured to not be able to do too much with Dr. Facilier. So if Facilier comes down and you can quest and get pretty close to the 20 lore you need, you're still in a great spot. So just don't panic if the Facilier comes down. Do your thing and just know challenging at that stage may not be the way to go. If you're still low on lore, then yeah, I guess you just have to continue dealing with it as best you can. But a lot of times, if you're already like in the 10s or like 12s, you can start questing and hope that you can outrace your opponent there. And then finally, just note that Facilier's effect only applies to challenges by characters. So your removal, like Smash and Fire the Cannons or Grab Your Swords, still destroy and make their characters go into the graveyard as normal. So a really great counter, and why Grab Your Swords is so versatile and valuable, is a lot of times, let's say opponent has like Brooms, Pascals, a damaged Rafiki, that sort of stuff, and a Facilier comes down. One Grab Your Sword still kind of wipes their board. Like still they have Dr. Facilier and his effects, but at least none of those characters go back to their hand, right? And so it really equalizes the playing field a bit. Grab Your Swords also just works against the Magic Broom and the Mickey combo, as well as it demolishes the Pascal as a bonus effect if you don't want to spend a Fire the Cannons to kill the Pascal. So yeah, that's I would say mostly it for a Steel Amethyst or Sapphire. Sapphire Steel against Amber Amethyst, and I'm trying to think if there's any other notable things. So I didn't primarily run too many Steel Sapphire decks so far, but I'm just interpolating kind of my experiences from both playing against the Steel Sapphire deck as well as kind of having run it a couple of times. And so I really hope it helps you prepare for kind of any of your matches, or if you're planning on playing the starter decks and want to choose Sapphire Steel or get Sapphire Steel. I hope this video helps you just be able to better pilot the deck, and hope you have a great day. Take care.